Okay, my lecture today is based on a Chinese fortune cookie obtained at a local restaurant, which shall go nameless, but they're rumored to be famous for their scorpion bowls, though I wouldn't know anything about that. Anyway, it reads, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. That's Macbeth for you right there. Arguably the whole of Shakespearean tragedy, but particularly Macbeth, and we'll see that. Anyway, I want to begin with some more conventional political analysis of the play. It is a very negative portrait of monarchy as a form of government. Now, again, the standard line on the play, or at least a standard line on the play, is that it was a tribute to the new Scottish king, James I. I forgot to mention there's some added evidence for this, is James I was very interested in witchcraft and wrote a book on demonology. And again, I have to say that when James came to the throne, he became the new patron of Shakespeare's theater company. They went from being the Lord Chamberlain's men. They became the King's Men. You all remember their big hit Louis Louis from the 1560s. But there are reasons to see some kind of link between this play and James I. Still, I have the continuing problem that if it's a portrait of the king's homeland in Scotland, it seems to be a very negative one. And any negative aspects of kingship would have to be qualified by the fact that it presents this as Scottish kingship, and even, as we'll see, offers English kingship as an alternative and superior. Still, from what we've been seeing about kingship, this play once again highlights the fundamental problem with kingship, and that is succession. Kingship appears to offer a very simple solution to the political problem of succession. What do you do when the current government ends? You want a peaceful succession, and monarchy seems to offer this very simple formula that the eldest son of the reigning monarch becomes the next king. But that's precisely what doesn't happen in Macbeth. And indeed, Duncan seems to provoke a crisis by trying to name Malcolm as his successor, thereby provoking at least one of his thanes to kill Duncan in the hopes of becoming king. In the more fluid situation of the Scottish kingship, which appears to be an elective monarchy, Duncan makes precisely the wrong move. Now, this is one respect in which the English kingship is held up as superior within the terms of the play on page 76, Act 4, Scene 3, about line 154. We learn about the English king, the miracle-working Edward the Confessor, to spoken to the succeeding royalty, he leaves the healing benediction. With this strange virtue, we have the heavenly gift of prophecy. Now, this does make an interesting point about kingship, namely the effort to give it a sacred or sacramental quality. And this would be one way to try to stabilize a potentially fluid situation. If you can get an aura of sanctity about the kingship, then people will be more reluctant to disturb the orderly succession. And I think Shakespeare was very aware of this as a strategy within the English monarchs of his own day. They had become the head of the Church of England under Henry VIII. And there was a great effort within Shakespeare's day to give a kind of religious aura to the monarchy. I think Henry V suggests that Henry V certainly presents himself to his subjects as a Christian king, and we see him having a Te Deum sung after the Battle of Agincourt. And so this would be an effort to give a kind of stability to the kingship by giving it a sacramental quality. But the downside of that is illustrated in Macbeth with the desacralization of kingship. You can argue it's indeed the problem that Macbeth creates for himself. Duncan is a very saintly king. Unfortunately, that's about all he is. And he's a weak king precisely, it seems, because of his Christian disposition. And there's no question in the terms of the play that the murder of Duncan takes away the sanctity of kingship. If you look at page 33, this would be Act 2, Scene 3, about line 70. Almost the first thing Macduff says in response to the discovery of the dead Duncan is, "Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple." So this act of regicide is seen as specifically sacrilegious. And even Macbeth, on the next page, 34, chimes in on this in, as I was saying last time, what may be a prepared speech, but he may realize in the course of delivering it contains a certain truth. So that this is still Act 2, Scene 3, about line 96. Macbeth says, "Renown and grace is dead." And one thing Macbeth will discover to his horror is that he has killed the goose that laid the golden egg. That by murdering the sainted King Duncan, he's taken the sanctity away from kingship, and therefore, to a large extent, has left himself vulnerable. Now, in the terms of the play, the sanctity of kingship it does appear to be presented as a myth. That is, the play does not suggest that a divine being actually intervenes on the behalf of kings to preserve them. In fact, if that were true, Duncan wouldn't be murdered. In fact, quite the contrary. The play several times suggests that the special providence Hamlet speaks of may be available to sparrows, but not to ordinary human beings. So that on page 70, passage I read already, Lady Macduff realizes that for all her piety, it's not going to help her. This is Act 4, Scene 3, about line 75. Whither should I fly? I have done no harm. Now that should be your defense in a world of divine providence. But I remember now I am in this earthly world where to do harm is often laudable, to do good sometime accounted dangerous folly. And when a murderer enters and says, "Where is your husband?" she says, "I hope in no place so unsanctified where such as thou mayst find him." This sentiment that there is no effective providence is bitterly echoed by Macduff on page 79, Act 4, Scene 3, so about line 223, when he hears of the slaughter of his wife and children, he says, "Did heaven look on and would not take their part?" That is an unanswered question in this play, and a very profound and disturbing question. Here, as elsewhere in Shakespeare, that it does not seem, the world does not look obviously providential, where God takes care of good people and punishes evil people. In fact, often the opposite seems to happen, as Lady Macduff suggests. And in general, in Shakespeare, the sanctity of kingship is spoken of and never proven. This is very strong in Richard II, who presents himself as God's king and therefore untouchable and ends up murdered, just the way Duncan does. So usurpers have a lot of success in Shakespeare, as they do in history. They often is following history in these cases. And so the notion that monarchy can be sustained by a sacred aura, it sounds great in theory, but doesn't work all that well in practice in these plays. There's a very interesting essay on this general subject by a critic named Franco Moretti, who's at Stanford. I believe it's called The Eclipse of Sovereignty. Here, Amazon let me down once looking it up, but it is in his book, Signs Taken for Wonders, and I'm pretty sure it's called The Eclipse of Sovereignty. Again, for those of you who are interested in the connections to contemporary politics in these plays, Moretti makes a very interesting argument of the overall impact of Elizabethan theater on the English nation, and he's not just talking about Shakespeare here. It's a simple fact that in 1649, the English executed the reigning monarch Charles II. Quite a shocking event. especially since it was presented as a legal act. He was put on trial and then executed for his crimes against the English nation. It's not that somebody just killed him, but this was presented as a legal act. No less than John Milton was charged with defending this regicide before the court of European public opinion. Moretti effectively argues that Shakespeare's plays prepared for this. The Eclipse of Sovereignty is the way he puts it. I'll say the desacralization of kingship. That the net effect of watching all these plays, seeing kings deposed, seeing kings executed on stage, seeing them subject to all sorts of humiliations. And if you want to see humiliation, read Marlowe's Edward II. But Richard II would be a good example. King Lear would be a good example. Moretti argues that this was not without an effect. Monarchy was, in a sense, theater during this period. The kings and a queen like Elizabeth did try to maintain an aura by great theatrical events, pageants, various court appearances, and the appearance as divine, as raised above the ordinary human level, as untouchable. This was very important to the aura of kingship. And so when you had a theater, which often presented this and often was part and parcel of this process. Again, the fact that Shakespeare's company was sponsored by King James was all part of maintaining that aura of being a grand monarch. Still, when what's being portrayed on the stage is kings killed, we referred to the deposition scene in Richard II, which was not allowed to be printed during Shakespeare's lifetime, though presumably it was staged, and we think that the Earl of Essex wanted it staged as a prelude to his rebellion against Elizabeth. That in some ways this was the emperor's new clothes, and quite often kings were stripped, literally stripped on the stage. It happens with King Lear, who ends up naked in the middle of the third act. And these constant reminders, the king is but a man. We saw that in Henry V. The cumulative effect of this was to run counter to this Elizabethan myth, this general myth of the divine support of monarchy. Anyway, it's a very good essay. I highly recommend it. And it's something to think about. There's so much effort to show how the Elizabethan theater was complicit in Elizabethan rule and then King James's rule, the Jacobean theater. But there's a good counter-argument to be made that the overall effect of the drama was subversive, that it's the equivalent of what television does now to show us our great rulers in all their foibles. And to kind of cut them down to size. In some ways, the Elizabethan theater was already doing that. So I think Macbeth is an interesting example of the demythologizing of kingship. It really ends up showing it as indistinguishable from criminality in the case of Macbeth. Now, I do want to say something against the unique demonization of Macbeth. That is, I've been trying to suggest that the problem for Duncan is these Thanes and not just Macbeth. And it's interesting that Macbeth and Banquo are mentioned at the beginning of the play, and perhaps Macduff as well, if he is in fact Bellona's bridegroom, which I believe increasingly he is. Then it seems we want to say there's one rotten apple in the barrel, and it's Macbeth. There's one evil Thane, and here's the wonderful Banquo and the wonderful Macduff. And that's certainly the surface appearance of the play, particularly at the end when we're talking of the dead butcher and his fiend-like queen. Nevertheless, the play makes some very interesting suggestions about Banquo and Macduff that suggest they're not all that goody-goody. Now, it's interesting that in the source, Banquo is a co-conspirator with Macbeth. This is on page 111, if you've got the signet. It's about 5 lines down, talking about the murder of Duncan. At length, therefore, communicating his, Macbeth's, purposed intent with his trusty friends, amongst whom Banquo was the chiefest. Upon confidence of their promised aid, he slew the king at Inverness. So in the source, Banquo was in on the murder of Duncan. This is another reason why I have trouble with the idea that this play was a compliment to James because it was showing him descended from Banquo. Because Banquo in the Scottish sources is presented as a murderer. Now, Shakespeare does avoid that, does not present Banquo as a co-conspirator. Maybe that is an attempt to clean up the Banquo story to make the whole play more palatable to King James. People have argued that. Still, there's some very interesting touches to Banquo's characterization that show that the difference between him and Macbeth is not absolute, but they stand on some kind of continuum of evil. That if thoughts are evil, then Banquo is as evil as Macbeth. Page 24. This is the beginning of Act 2, so Act 2, Scene 1, about line 5. There he is with Flans. A heavy summons lies like head upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Now we know this is to be a characteristic of Macbeth, his sleeplessness. It's one of the signs of evil we see in Macbeth. Merciful powers, restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. Well, what are those thoughts? Maybe just sort of general human evil, but as we soon learn, Banquo was thinking about the weird sisters. And the strong implication is that he is as tempted as Macbeth. Macbeth hears their prophecies and is tempted into killing Duncan to become king. Banquo knows that he's been promised something too, and this is what comes out, top of page 25, so about line 15 in the scene, this dialogue between Macbeth and Banquo, actually line 20. Well, I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you they have showed some truth. The implication is, why not to me? And Macbeth very coyly says, I think not of them. Yet, when we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business if you would grant the time. At your kindest leisure, if you shall cleave to my consent when 'tis, it shall make honor for you. So I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchised and allegiance clear, I shall be counseled. Good response the while, thanks, sir, the like to you. That's a marvelous exchange between two politicians, where there's a very strong undertext there, especially if we're thinking in terms of the sources where Banquo is a co-conspirator. Banquo is feeling out Macbeth here. You got something. You're saying a quarter. Why haven't I gotten something? Macbeth says, play with me, and maybe you will get something. And Banquo is very cagey here. Macbeth is very cagey here. But then if you turn to page 40, you'll see there, this is the opening of Act 3. Thou hast it now, king, quarter, gloms all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playedst most foully for it. Yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that I myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine, why, by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up at hope, but hush no more. Now, this almost makes Banquo a co-conspirator, legally an accessory after the fact. He clearly has suspicions here that Macbeth has killed Duncan, and he does not bring them forward, doesn't speak up, and the motive seems to be that he, like Macbeth, is invested in the prophecies. They promised him something very good, that he would be the root and father of many kings, and why, therefore, disturb this process that appears to be unfolding. In other words, Banquo is not guiltless, as Shakespeare presents him. He's not a totally innocent figure. In fact, you begin to think, if the witches had promised the kingship immediately to Banquo and promised Macbeth he would eventually sire kings. It's Banquo that might have killed Duncan. There are many gestures in the play that cut across the simple opposition between Macbeth on one side and Banquo, and I'll suggest Macduff on the other. These guys are thanes. They're all thanes. They're all thugs. I mean, they're all noble warriors, in fact. They're all Homeric heroes. They cannot be trusted. They're largely interested in their own ambition. And so I think who knows what would have happened if Banquo hadn't been killed. Who knows what would have happened if Macbeth had made some deal with him. Clearly, Shakespeare goes out of his way to suggest Banquo gets invested in whatever this process is going on in Scotland. Now, Macduff is a more heroic figure, and it's hard to spot him in activities as surreptitious as Banquo. But we do have the simple fact that Malcolm distrusts Macduff. And I'll speak briefly about the scene at the end of Act 4, Act 4, Scene 3. This is another example of Shakespeare's handling of the fourth act problem. His plays reached a climax with the murder of Banquo in Act 3. We're going to have the denouement in Act 5 with Macbeth killed. We need something in between. Shakespeare comes up with, again, a mini-drama, this long exchange between Macduff and Malcolm, which is cut to pieces in productions. You will not see much of this in any... people don't understand the logic of Shakespeare. He wants our emotions to calm down after the climax in the third act so we can get ready to be pumped up again for the fifth act. But in any case, I've noticed in all the movies I've watched, this thing gets cut entirely or cut to pieces. But we have here something like the quarrel between Brutus and Cassius and Julius Caesar, something like Act 4 of Hamlet and the Ophelia drama. We get really a very dramatic scene between Malcolm and Macduff, in which Malcolm at first pretends to be a potentially worse tyrant than Macbeth, and it is a test of Macduff. And it may surprise us that Malcolm is so distrustful of Macduff. But notice page 72, Act 4, Scene 3, about line 25. Perchance even there where I did find my doubts, why in that rawness left you wife and child, those precious motives, those strong knots of love without leave-taking? I pray you, let not my jealousies be your dishonors, but mine own safeties. You may be rightly just, whatever I shall think. This is pretty strong that Malcolm is very suspicious of Macduff because he is known to have abandoned his wife and children with what turns out to be disastrous consequences, and it does not seem to be the act of a gentle man, of a Christian man, of someone who cares about family. It seems like a Macbeth-like act or a tyrannical-like act, and so there are hints here that, you know, even Macduff may not be the perfect gentleman. Now, in the larger context of the play, it's particularly interesting because it shows something about Malcolm, that he has learned a lesson from his father's disaster. On page 75, this is Act 4, Scene 3, line 120, modest wisdom plucks me from over-credulous haste. Duncan's problem was he put too much faith in men like Cawdor. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. It's very significant that Malcolm no longer has an absolute trust, and he's suspicious of the Thane of Fife, who deserted his wife. And it may be the most hopeful sign in this very dark play that Malcolm perhaps will offer the ideal that I showed you Hollinshead spoke of in the source of a combination of clemency and cruelty. Remember, Hollinshead said that Duncan had too much clemency and Macbeth had too much cruelty. And Malcolm, it suggests here, is going to be suspicious of the Thanes, and maybe learn to control them. Now, this is particularly associated with the English here. And I do want to stress the oddness of the ending, which is a very peculiar anglicizing of Scotland, the long-term English dream, which may be coming to an end even in your lifetimes. Scotland moves towards independence. Notice Macbeth's attitude towards the English. This is page 86, Act 5, Scene 3, about line 8. Then fly false thanes and mingle with the English epicures. I've never heard the English accused, for example, of their good taste in food. But here they're presented as epicures. And I think the idea is, the Thanes are warlike, they're savage. The English are more pleasure-loving. I guess it's almost like the Napoleon's idea of the English, a nation of shopkeepers. But that is important in the connection with the play because England is presented as the more civilized land here, and do understand that Malcolm, to regain the Scottish throne, has made a deal with the English. On page 88, this is the opening of Act 5, Scene 4, cousins, and he's here with he's got a lot of English cousins. Cousins, I hope the days are near at hand that chambers will be safe. And there is that sense that what the English will bring to Scotland here is a domestication. As we've seen, the English are associated with a truly saintly king, with Edward the Confessor. They have a settled order of succession. Scotland is being presented as savage and barbaric here, and the calling in of the English will domesticate Scotland. This has been England's presentation of the situation for centuries. But do understand what's happening here. The play opens with a Norwegian invasion of Scotland, which is presented as bad. It ends with an English invasion of Scotland, which is presented as good. Now, it's a play written by an Englishman and presented for the English, though at a court presided over by a king from Scotland. But still, it's I want to call your attention to these strange moments in Shakespeare, as we saw in Hamlet, where the beginning, the worst thing that might possibly happen is a Norwegian invasion. At the end of the play, what's presented as salvation is the invasion of a Norwegian king, Fortinbras. And here, this play ends with Malcolm being restored to the throne, but only by virtue of English armies. And you can take a guess as to what the position of Scotland versus England will be after this. Scotland will be subordinated to England. There's even a strange touch at the end. This is page 97, so Act 5, Scene 8, where, it's about line 62, where Malcolm announces, "My thanes and kinsmen henceforth be earls, the first that ever Scotland in such an honor named." I'd like to offer this as the culminating Anglicization of Scotland here. We've seen from the beginning the problem is thanes. Thane is an Old English word, in fact, roughly corresponding to what we mean by baron. Thanes are warlords, they're leaders of their own armies. The conversion of them to earls suggests something more like the system that emerged under the Tudor regime under Henry VII and Henry VIII, where the nobles were subordinate to the king and started to derive their power from them. Scotland begins this play with an elective monarchy where it seems the thanes get together to choose the king. I think the end suggests that the king now creates the earls. Now this is in the source. You can see it on page 119 if you got the signet, where indeed Holinshead talks about this around the middle of page 119. Immediately after his coronation, he called a parliament and forfeited. This is now Malcolm, in which he rewarded them with lands and livings that had assisted him against Macbeth, advancing them to fees and offices as he saw cause, and commanded that especially those that bear the surname of any officer's lands should have and enjoy the same. He created many earls, lords, barons, and knights, many of them that before were thanes, were at this time made earls. Shakespeare really read these sources carefully, and this does seem to register. And here, Macbeth fits into a pattern you can see throughout Shakespeare. The way to a stable, centralized monarchy is civil war, and the destruction in the process of all the independent nobles. This is exactly the process that Shakespeare portrays in his history plays. You can already be seeing Henry V, but really the Wars of the Roses in the three Henry VI plays and Richard III. By the time you get to Henry Richmond, who becomes Henry VII and the founder of the Tudor line, so many nobles have been killed off in the civil wars that it becomes possible to establish a central monarchy. That was indeed the Tudor solution, especially under Henry VIII. Most of the established aristocratic families had been killed off in all this internecine warfare, and Henry took the titles, and in particular took church land he seized, and endowed and created new lords, and now their power flowed from the monarchy rather than being independent. And you see something of that process here. It's in some ways a very Machiavellian idea. The last man standing becomes the king and has a much more stable position now because you don't have all these independent nobles. The thanes, I think, are representative of that. So I think the play fits into a lot of political ideas that are common in Shakespeare and that are illustrated in the histories as well. The one last general point I'd like to make is on the issue of religion and politics, which will then take us back to the story of Macbeth. Again, I've been trying to show you that religion is a very problematic aspect of politics in Shakespeare's Christian world. That Christianity is a new factor in politics that was not there in the ancient world of Coriolanus and possibly is just being introduced in the world of Antony and Cleopatra. But Duncan is an example of Machiavelli's point, his concern that Christianity is making modern regimes weak. We saw that at the very beginning of the course in looking at the discourses. And Duncan is a truly weak king because of his unwarlike character. I'm probably making too much of this, but I still can't get over his opening words, "What bloody man is that?" I mean, Duncan, it's a battle. There's going to be blood. But there's a strong sense there, I feel, that I wish we could have battles without blood. Why do people have to get so bloody? So bloody, as the English would say. And that sense of his distaste for the king's warrior-like role. Again, he is not leading his troops, and all his problems flow from the fact that the thanes are winning the battles, and Duncan's standing on the sideline and thinking, I'll give him a few titles, and that will satisfy them. So this is a theme, again, that runs throughout Shakespeare. It's there at the very beginning. The Henry VI plays are very much like this, and as I said, Henry VI is characterized very much the way Duncan is. You even have York saying to him the same thing that I showed you, one of the sources, that you deserve to be in church. You don't deserve to be running a country. Now, when I raise this issue of Christianity and politics, I'm broadly speaking placing Shakespeare in the movement we call the Enlightenment. He's a little early for that. The Enlightenment's a late 17th, 18th century phenomenon. But what I'm claiming about Shakespeare here, I just want to say, is not all that unusual, and probably most of you accept the idea of keeping religion out of politics. We have, as a very established principle in this country, the separation of church and state, and the kind of phenomena Shakespeare is looking at are exactly why we do. And there was a critique of the religious impact on politics that in many ways begins with Machiavelli, but is continued by many people who were very different from Machiavelli in other respects. In some ways, Christianity intrudes in politics and makes people weaker, less willing to pursue war. On the other hand, it creates new religious motives for warfare, which can make it even more savage. The Crusades, strictly speaking, ended around the beginning of the 13th century, but it's interesting how strong a presence the Crusades still have in Shakespeare. And this was this monumental religious effort to enroll politics in a religious motive, to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims. We saw this even at the end of Henry V, where Henry V is still locked in, anachronistically it turns out, into a crusading motive. He talks about going to Constantinople and winning it back from the Turks. In fact, the Turks hadn't won Constantinople at that time yet, but still it's a crusading idea, as it turns out. You read the Henry IV plays, Henry V's father proposed a crusade, wanted to go to the Holy Land, and Richard II, at the very beginning, when a man is banished, he talks about going on a crusade. That phenomenon was still very much in the background in Europe, a Europe which was still involved in warfare against the Turks, as we see in the story of Cyprus in Othello, and even more strongly, by Shakespeare's day, religious warfare had broken out within Europe over the division between Protestants and Catholics. And this was very strong in England. Henry VIII had taken the country Protestant. Then under his daughter Mary, the country had become Catholic again. And then under Elizabeth, the country had become Protestant again. And each time they made this switch, a lot of people got burned. There's a big debate of who burned more, the Catholics or the Protestants, but there's a lot of burning of heretics. And of course, you'd had the Spanish Armada, 1588, an attempt by the Spanish Catholics and in general the Habsburg Catholics to reimpose Catholicism on England. So religion had begun to emerge as a very potent force and a very destructive force in politics, culminating in the 30 Years' War in the 17th century that destroyed somewhere between half and maybe 60% of the population of Central Europe. And there was a general agreement among philosophers at this time that something had to be done about it. In some ways, when I say that Shakespeare is worried about the impact of religion on politics, this is the sort of thing he has in mind. It's something he very much had in common with the humanists of the day, figures like Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel has an attack on the crusading spirit, and presents crusading warfare as ridiculous and absurd. Men like Thomas More and Erasmus, it is interesting that they were so opposed to religious warfare that they did not side with Protestantism, even though intellectually they sympathized more with the Protestant position than the Catholic. Luther was very disappointed that men like Erasmus would not come to his side, but they sensed that the division within the Catholic Church, Catholic means universal in Greek, within the church that had been universal in Western Europe, that this would lead to warfare. And Thomas More went to his death because he would not support Henry VIII's taking England Protestant, believed that the impulse here on the part of these humanists was that they saw the horrors of Catholic Protestant warfare coming to Europe. And again, I think Shakespeare participates in that when he worries about the impact of religion on politics. Cervantes, the great contemporary of Shakespeare, this is what Don Quixote is all about. It's an attack on the crusading spirit. and the mixing up of religion and politics. So in this, Shakespeare fits into a very broad movement at the time. I've been making some very specific arguments about what goes on in his plays. I just wanted to pause and suggest that this is by no means unique to Shakespeare, and indeed everywhere you look in his day, you're seeing people very concerned about the heating up of politics based on religious disputes, and above all, doctrinal disputes within Christianity, but still the disputes between Christians and Muslims that led to all the naval warfare in the Mediterranean in the 16th century. So, I've been calling Hamlet, Othello, and Macbeth Christian plays. Again, I'm reluctant to classify them as such, but still, it's really, when you step back from these plays, in one way or another, they're all about the dangers of orienting political life by the supernatural. That's very strong in Macbeth and Hamlet. You have two figures who change what they do politically because they've had a kind of revelation. The other world is speaking to them. Othello's a little different until you begin to see that Iago is a demonic parody of a priest. What he does is to introduce Othello to these Christian truths about human depravity. He kind of becomes the evil twin of his father confessor. And what he gets Othello to see is into the depths of depravity of the human soul. Ironically, there are no depths of depravity in Desdemona, but Iago's trick is to make Iago think that, and he offers proofs as true as Holy Writ to him, as he puts it. If you look at these plays, they show how complicated political life becomes when it's oriented by the other world and by messages that come from the other world. What is the line? The supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. Hamlet says, this vision I have seen may be a devil. You just don't know when you start to be oriented by the supernatural, what you're living with. Now, I'd like to now go a little more deeply into Macbeth and what it means for him to be oriented by the supernatural. I think this is the deepest aspect of the play, and Shakespeare really shows a profound transformation of Macbeth's consciousness here. And I think we can best understand it in light of what we traced in the Roman plays, which is, again, one reason I began this course with them, even though Shakespeare wrote two of them after Macbeth. And that is, Macbeth goes from a belief in human agency to a belief in human passivity. That is, at the start of the play, he is a hero in the classical sense. As we saw, he's disdaining fortune. He really believes that his fate is in his hands as a warrior. That's the meaning of being the warrior that he is. And yet what we see develop in the play as a result of the encounter with the witches is a tremendous passivity in Macbeth. This is page 12, Act 1, Scene 3, about line 143. If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. That's a transformation here. We talked about this in connection with the Roman plays. Remember, in Coriolanus, there were no soothsayers, even though in Shakespeare's source there are some. There were no omens and oracles, and Coriolanus said, fortune is for the followers, it's not for the flyers. And again, his principle is God helps those who help themselves. And we saw the gradual intrusion of soothsayers and prophecies until in the world of Antony and Cleopatra, the characters were starting to believe in destiny and that things were out of their hands. And that whole sense of moving from a world of active citizens in a republic to these passive subjects of an empire is really what Shakespeare charts in the Roman plays. Well, we see something similar here in Macbeth. It starts with his, if chance will have me king, and chance will cry, I don't have to do anything. But the real transformation is when he decides, well, I got to get on the side of destiny. And that's what I want to focus on here. What happens politically when you start to think you're destined, that there's a kind of current of history that's behind you. It's the source of Macbeth's tyranny. And that's what I find most extraordinary about the play, that Shakespeare seems to intuit something about tyranny in the modern world, that it's going to take the form of men of destiny. I don't know how far to push this, but when you think of Napoleon and you think of Hitler and you think of Stalin and other of the modern tyrants, they all had this sense that they were part of they were men of destiny, they were the wave of the future. I don't know how Shakespeare foresaw this, but I think somehow he did. And what's most peculiar about it is that it is a transformation of a Christian principle, and specifically it involves taking the idea of heaven and now searching for heaven on earth. And that, of course, is the principle of Macbeth's famous soliloquy, which we've looked at already, but I want to look at it again. This is pages 20 to 21, Act 1, Scene 7. If it were done, when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surceased success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here, but here upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. Now, as I said to you last time, this is not a rejection of the afterlife. This is an attempt to embrace the afterlife in the here and now, to find the be-all and the end-all. That's something infinite and absolute. It's what in Christianity would be associated with heaven and the afterlife. But Macbeth wants it here and now. But this blow might be the be-all and end-all here, but here upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. In a weird way, this has become the formula of modern tyrannies, the attempt to have heaven on earth. And you see this in the great modern ideological tyrannies. You see it in Nazism, you see it in communism. They were all in one way or another an attempt to secularize the Christian promise of heaven or of a perfect life, to find it in the here and now. That's what Nazism offered. That's what communism offered. And there are a lot of very serious analyses of the ideology of totalitarianism, of both communism and fascism, that see them in these terms. And Shakespeare seems to grasp that here. And in particular, what I want to concentrate on is the peculiar effect of having Macbeth focus on the future, his obsession with the future, and therefore his enormous devaluation of the present. This is the nature of his, I almost said the Nietzsche, but this is the nature of his transformation. You see it in both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. If you look at page 18, this is Act 1, Scene 5, about line 56. Thy letters, this is Lady Macbeth speaking of Macbeth, thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant. I want to focus on that. That is the fundamental transformation in the consciousness of both Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. They now talk about the ignorant present. They talk about contempt with the present. In the future, they will be king and queen. And they know it because they've gotten this prediction from the witches. And, the prediction about Thane of Quarters come true. And so you see the idea now, the present is ignorant. Other people don't know what the future is going to be. And there's this real contempt. Present's worthless. I feel now the future in the instant. That's the equivalent of the be-all and the end-all, but here, upon this bank and shoal of time. Again, I want to show they are reaching for something that Christianity promises way off in the future. Christianity introduces the idea of a last judgment, for example, and that haunts the play. If you turn to page 33, for example, this is Macduff speaking. It's Act 2, Scene 3, about line 80. Up and see the great doom's image. That's just an image of the last judgment, but it shows how thinking about the present is governed by the idea of the last judgment. And then page 65, Act 4, Scene 1, Macbeth speaking. Act 4, Scene 1, about line 117. What really upsets him in the vision of Banquo's descendants is a fourth. Start eyes, what will the line stretch out to the crack of doom? Again, you see here how these characters are haunted by this new idea of an apocalypse, of an end of time, and the great temptation for Macbeth is to speed up the process. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, I want it, and I want it now. I want heaven on earth now. And again, this is so curiously anticipatory of the kinds of ideologies you get in the 19th and 20th century that in one way or another promise heaven on earth. There's a curious critique of this on page 31. So Act 2, Scene 3, the marvelous Porter's speech, the guy who thinks he's guarding Hellmouth here, and indeed is. I could spend a whole lecture just going through this speech, but look at top of page 31, so it's about line 4 and 5 in Act 2, Scene 3. Here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. Now, as your notes point out, farmers would hoard food expecting a bad harvest and thinking the price of food would go up and they'd make a killing, and sometimes the harvest would turn good and there'd be an abundance and the price of food would go down. That's the farmer who hangs himself in the expectation of plenty. But this whole speech, and maybe I can come back to it, is filled with images of Macbeth and what's wrong with Macbeth. And ultimately, Macbeth is someone who hanged himself in the expectation of plenty, who destroyed himself in the expectation of the infinite, of having the be-all and the end-all here upon this bank and shoal of time. He wants that, and yet he destroys himself in the hope that there is an infinite. We've been seeing this since Antony and Cleopatra. Shakespeare presents the truly ancient world, the world of Coriolanus, as a finite world, as a world of finite desires, finite goals. Coriolanus ain't about to give up the whole world for Virgilia. That's part and parcel of his life in Rome, his marriage. It makes him a citizen of Rome. But Antony and Cleopatra, they're expecting new heaven and new earth. Eternity is in their eyes. They want the infinity. It's the thing that's haunted all these characters we've been looking at. Hamlet, Othello, in a weird way now Macbeth. This desire for something infinite, that you could have it all. You could have perfection. And it's always been shadowed by the sense that if you don't have perfection, you have nothing. That's why I read you that fortune cookie. And I'll remind you of Macbeth's line, to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. All this culminates in his most famous speech on page 90, the Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech. So this is Act 5, Scene 5, about line 16. one of the most famous speeches in all of Shakespeare. And I want to concentrate on the peculiar time sense in this speech. So this is about line 19, page 90. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. It's again a Christian idea. There's no last syllable of recorded time in the ancient view of the world. The ancient view of time was cyclical and not apocalyptic as this is here. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. What you see here is the way Macbeth's nihilism grows out of his apocalyptic expectations. And I want to particularly focus on the fact that this speech refers to tomorrow and to yesterday and never to today. And indeed, this is what drops out of Macbeth's world today. Today is merely the ignorant present. He is haunted by tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. He is haunted by these expectations of this future perfection. We have seen it's what drives him again and again in the play. I'll kill Duncan and then things will be perfect. Oops, there's Banquo and Fleance. I'll kill Banquo and then things will be perfect. Oops, Fleance escapes. Well, let's start killing everybody in Scotland. It's a frightening anticipation of the logic of modern tyrannical regimes. Men like Hitler and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot. The sense that perfection is somehow associated with the extermination of other human beings because they're so messy. They mess up your lives. But here we have, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow to the last syllable of recorded time. And then we have yesterdays, but what we don't have is today. And indeed, this is the profoundest sense in which Macbeth does kill the goose that lays the golden egg. He kills today. He kills living in the present where, human beings ultimately enjoy things. You can think back to some food you had yesterday. You can think ahead to some dinner you're having tomorrow. But the dinner you actually eat, that's the real pleasure. And here you see the present drops out here, and it leads him to this notion of nothingness here, signifying nothing. What did the fortune cookie say? I've got it here. I know it had it exactly right. Yes, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. We've seen this all or nothing attitude in a lot of these characters. We've seen it in both Othello and Hamlet in their attitude towards women. They're either angels or they're whores. There's nothing in between. There's either perfection or nothing. And now we see that on almost a metaphysical scale in Macbeth, that his quest was for the be-all and the end-all here, but he never found it, and the result is it's a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. Indeed, what Shakespeare shows about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth is the self-destructive character of their desire. In some ways, this is a classic portrait of desire here. The tyrant is associated with desire. The man who desires the crown so much that he will kill for it, that he'll kill the legitimate ruler or the legitimate heir. Moreover, he does so to be able to fulfill his desires. And this is the way Lady Macbeth presents the tyrannical life. Page 22, this is Act 1, Scene 7. This is what she challenges Macbeth with, about line 39. Art thou afeard to be the same thing in thine own act and valor as thou art in desire? That's almost the definition of the tyrant and tyrannical desire. It's that you let nothing stand between you and your desires. But again, here's where the Porter supplies such a marvelous critique of Macbeth, page 31. Again, in the speech, it's the bottom of page 31, about line 30 in Act 2, Scene 3, when he talks about drink, because he's been drinking a lot and everybody's been drinking a lot. And he says that drink provokes three things: marry, sir, nose painting, sleep, and urine. Lechery, sir, it provokes and unprovokes. It provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. And that would have been a good lesson for Macbeth to hear, because he has all these desires, but when he seems to fulfill them, it takes away the performance. He finds, indeed, that his life is worthless as a tyrant. Look at page 86, Act 5, Scene 3. I read you about line 20. I read you this bit already. This push will cheer me ever or deceit me now. There it is again. That's that all or nothing attitude. But now he realizes I've lived long enough. My way of life has fallen to the sear, the yellow leaf, and that which should accompany old age is honor, love, obedience, troop of friends. I must not look to have, chiefly because he's killed them all. But in their stead, curses not loud but deep, mouth, honor, breath, which the poor heart would fain deny and dare not. And this is, in a way, this is Shakespeare's greatest portrait of the tyrant. He had attempted it earlier in Richard III. Macbeth is a more profound shot at it. The tyrant who seems like an ideal, the man who has everything and who wins it by virtue of his own efforts. In many ways, Machiavelli's doctrines are a praise of the tyrant and tyranny and what the tyrant can accomplish. But here we see the emptiness of it, something that Lady Macbeth formulates on page 46, Act 3, Scene 2, about line 4. Nort's had, all spent, where desire is got without content. 'Tis safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy. And that notion of desire is got without content. And again, it provokes and unprovokes the desire. That turns out to be what's so problematic about tyranny. You destroy the very thing you sought for. Just as I said, Macbeth destroys kingship in the very process of attaining it. By his act of usurpation, he takes away what made kingship attractive in the first place. Namely, you're this wonderful man that everybody looks up to, and you're secure on the throne. This is a problem of all usurpers, that they've taken away the aura of kingship, and they make it all too easy for someone to usurp from them. And so we do have this strong sense in Macbeth. Insecurity, that is what he was seeking, the most perfect security. And the witches seem to give him the promise of that. And yet that's precisely what he does not get. Now the dialogue between Malcolm and Macduff has a great deal of discussion of the nature of the tyrant as Malcolm tries to portray himself as a potential tyrant. But it seems to me the key line is on page 73. So this is Act 4, Scene 3, about line 66, where Macduff says, boundless intemperance in nature is a tyranny. And flip-flopping the notion here, the tyrant seems to be the man who gets to have everything he desires. But what Macduff is saying is boundless desire is a tyranny. That the tyrant becomes enslaved to his own desires, that he is not the free man. The tyrant presents himself as the freest of men, the man who is not bound by the ordinary limitations of humanity, who wanted the kingship and just took it. And yet what we see here is boundless intemperance in nature is a tyranny. That very boundless desire serves as a tyranny over your soul. And so that's what we see in both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, that what is presented as an act of self-assertion and the achievement of their desires turns them into automata. They become the slaves of their own desire and their own act. And Shakespeare images this very powerfully in the play in terms of action without sight. Macbeth believes he has been given foresight, that he's had the wonderful advantage of seeing ahead of time what his fate, his future will be, and it allows him to pursue it. The witches have allowed him, as he puts it, to see into the seeds of time. But in fact, what Shakespeare shows is the blindness of Macbeth and of Lady Macbeth, and there's a very strong set of images for this. You can see it beginning on page 15. This is Act 1, Scene 5, the first of many invocations. So Act 1, Scene 5, about line 50, page 15. Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears what it has done to see. Here he invokes darkness, that he might not see what he's going to do. And indeed, ironically, this is what happens. He does not see what he's doing, which is to say he does not understand the full consequences of murdering Duncan. Now, Lady Macbeth shares this with him. You just turned to page 17. Very similar invocation. So Act 1, Scene 5, line 51. Lady Macbeth says, "Come, thick night, and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to see hold. They are both asking to act in darkness. On a conscious level, they're claiming we're acting with perfect comprehension of what we're doing. This is an assertion of our freedom. We will get what we desire. You want to be king, so you kill the sitting king, and you become king. And yet in the very act of talking about it, they talk about acting blindly in darkness. Look at page 56. So this is Act 3, Scene 4. As we begin to see the transformation in Macbeth here, about line 136, Act 3, Scene 5, I'm in blood, stepped in so far, that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er. Strange things I have it that will to hand, which must be acted ere they may be scanned. Again, this is a man who contemplated his actions. We see how much thought he puts into killing Duncan. If it be done, when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. The assassination could trammel up the consequences and catch with his surcease success. He's thinking about it. He's going through the potential consequences. Unfortunately, he doesn't fully think them through and goes ahead and kills Duncan, and he gradually becomes trapped. That's what I'm getting at. He becomes a slave to the logic of tyranny. It seems to be an assertion of freedom, the ultimate action of a Superman. I'm beyond good and evil, I can kill the king, no problem. What we see is how that draws him into a series of acts where the actions escalate and the thought obliterates. He still gives some thought before he kills Banquo. He almost consults Lady Macbeth on it. But this is the transformation here, where he realizes he's lost his freedom. He has entered into a process that is ballooned out of control. I'm in blood, stepped in so far, that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er. There's no turning back now. And strange things I haven't had that will to hand, which must be acted ere they may be scanned. This is the opposite of if it were done when it is done. Early in the play, Macbeth scans the action before doing it. But now, essentially, what he's saying is that he's not even going to think anymore. He's just going to react. He's just going to kill people, and we'll see how it turns out, and we'll think about it later. You know, it's shoot, ask questions later. And you see it on page 66. This is Act 4, Scene 1, line 143. Time, thou anticipates my dread exploits. The flighty purpose ne'er is o'ertook, unless the deed go with it. From this moment, the very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand, and even now to crown my thoughts with acts, be it thought and done. By the way, this is a kind of vision of divine omnipotence, that you could just think something that would happen. The only person of whom that's true is the God of the revealed religions. But in any case, you know, no thinking. You know, act first, think later. Now, the ultimate image of this in the play is Lady Macbeth sleepwalking. Incredibly powerful scene. It's Act 5, Scene 1. But one which above all presents the metaphorical culmination of everything that she and Macbeth have been invoking, namely to act in darkness, to act without thinking, as we hear on page 81, line 10 in Act 5, Scene 1. A great perturbation in nature to receive at once the benefit of sleep and do the effects of watching. And indeed, what she learns here is page 83, line 71, what's done cannot be undone. Earlier in the play, she said, a little water clears up this deed. Now she says, line 53, all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Again, she thought that they were free. Now she learns they are captives of this process that they've set in motion. Now, part of it is that they have in effect destroyed the whole world of nature here. They've entered into this supernatural soliciting and pursued this process. It is a tremendous assertion of egotism on their parts. You see that in Macbeth. Turn to page 46. This is bottom of 46. It's Act 3, Scene 2, about line 15. But let the frame of things disjoined, both the worlds suffer, ere we will eat our meal in fear. What an incredible claim that is. This is not minor league aspiration here. This is where I talk about, you know, the desire for the infinite and the absolute. Macbeth is willing to see the very frame of things disjoined, and both the worlds suffer. And I believe your note is right that means the afterlife and this life, heaven and earth. Ere we will eat our meal in fear. This is a strong motif that Shakespeare shows in Macbeth, page 56. This is Act 3, Scene 4, about line 136. For mine own good all causes shall give way. And what an incredible claim of egotism here, and so characteristic especially of the modern tyrant. Again, think Hitler, think Stalin, think Mao here, that somehow the claims to being special, to being singled out, justify all sorts of murder, the whole disruption of the world. Hitler particularly with his idea of wanting to bring down the whole world of Germany in April of 1945. If he was going to die, the whole of his world should die with him. Macbeth's extraordinary speech on page 62, Act 4, Scene 1, about line 50, when he comes to the witches again to be assured about the future, what he says to them is, this is line 52, though you untie the winds and let them fight against the churches, though the yeasty waves confound and swallow navigation up, though bladed corn be lodged and trees blown down, though castles topple on their warders' heads, though palaces and pyramids do slope their heads to their foundations, though the treasure of nature's germens tumble all together, even till destruction sicken, answer me to what I ask you. There could not be a more absolute demand here. He contemplates the destruction of just about everything here, and even of nature itself. As your notes point out, Germans are, they're not a bunch of people from Berlin. It's the seeds of all life here. And there is a sense in which his crime is ultimately a crime against nature. It's for one thing a crime against generation. You see this, that Lady Macbeth early on does not seem to be the best of mothers here, where she asked to be unsexed on page 17, and later with Lady Macbeth, the most famous passage on bottom of page 22, so Act 1, Scene 7, line 54. I've given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. What an extraordinary passage that is, and the idea of your mother who would destroy her own nursing child. Remember, this is the curse of Macbeth. His great worry about Banquo is that Banquo will inherit the future. That Banquo will be the one who sires future kings, and this is page 42, Act 3, Scene 1, line 60. They hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren scepter in my grip, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. For them the gracious Duncan have I murdered. This is indeed his problem: fruitlessness, barrenness. He's become king, but he will not be succeeded. Of course he won't be succeeded. He's destroyed the process of succession. And he's got a wife who would murder the children. I mean, this is not the greatest domestic household ever portrayed here. These are, Lady Macbeth speaks of murdering her own child. Macbeth has murdered sleep. Great nature's bomb, as it's called in the play. They have murdered nature. Indeed, ultimately, they see nature as their great opponent. Because nature sets limits to human beings. It sets limits to their desires, for example. And ultimately, you can see Macbeth's great enemy is nature. And what he embraces is supernature, the supernatural. That somehow that will give him perfection and will give him the absolute. It turns out, in fact, to be the source of his faith in the very prophecies of the witches. If you turn to page 64, we'll have to examine this a little more next time, but just to start setting this up, what do they promise him that makes him feel so confident? Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. And what does he say? This is page 64 at 4 Scene 1. That will never be. Who could impress the forest, bid the tree unfix his earthbound root? Sweet Bodemins, good. Rebellious dead rise never, till the wood of Birnam rise, and our high place Macbeth shall live the lease of nature. It's a curious faith in nature that misleads him. He who wishes to be exempt from nature, who's willing to see all nature's germens tumble together, who has contempt for the natural order, nevertheless ultimately relies on it. No forest is ever going to come to attack him. He doesn't think of the obvious stratagem that Malcolm thinks of there. So it's as if he assumes everyone but him is exempt, that only he is exempt from nature. Only he as the tyrant can stand above nature. Everyone else, everything else in the world will follow the rules of nature. Trees don't move. He obviously hasn't seen Lord of the Rings. And he's safe because there's an order of nature out there, even as he constantly thinks of violating that order of nature himself. In all these unnatural acts, which again and again are directed against the generative power of nature, which are directed against children. His greatest crime is murdering the children of Macduff. We see a very poignant little child destroyed in the process, and Macbeth himself is denied that. So Shakespeare has an extraordinary vision in this play when he sees a new form of tyranny that would be directed against nature itself, that would see nature as somehow imperfect, and human will as being able to create something more perfect than nature. Shakespeare sees that as a very dangerous possibility here. Okay, I covered a lot of what I wanted to say about Macbeth. I'll finish up next time. There's obviously more to say about the play, but we should have a good amount of time next time, so do certainly raise any questions you have specifically about the final. But more generally, I hope that you've been saving up questions and we can talk more about some of those next time.